Oh, thanks. So Lucy Samara pre-recorded a piece that we're going to play first and then move into prayer together. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Lucy Samara. I'm a member of First Church and I serve on your staff as communications coordinator. For the last 6 weeks, I had the honor and privilege of participating in the Lenten book study group led by Mandy Grace and Rob Backus that focused on the book, The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. We had a wonderful, active group, very interesting conversations, learned a lot. This was a very thought-provoking and moving experience to be part of this group, and I'm grateful for everybody who was able to participate. This morning I have a brief reflection for you. I'm going to lift up the words of Richard Wagamese, an Indigenous Canadian writer who is a much beloved writer. Richard Rohr's daily devotional lifted up Richard's work in late April. So let me introduce you to Richard and then we'll have an opening prayer. Richard Wagamese's life was transformed when he was returned to his Ojibwe family and culture after being separated from them for most of his young life. In his final book, Embers, he shares meditations, reflections, and prayers that came to him during times of ritual and morning silence. He writes, "The words in this book are embers from the tribal fires that used to burn in our villages. They are embers from the spiritual fires burning in the hearts, minds, and souls of great writers about healing and love. They are heart songs. They are spirit songs, and shared with you, they become honor songs for the ritual ways that spawn them. Bring these words into your life. Feel them, sit with them, use them." Wagamese invites us to remember prayerfully both creation and creator. So hear these words in prayer. Remember. Remember the Creator is the wind on my face, the rain in my hair, the sun that warms me. Creator is the trees and the rocks and the grasses and the majesty of sky and the intense mystery of the universe. Creator is the infant who giggles at me in the grocery line, the beggar who reminds me how rich I truly am, the idea that fires my most brilliant moment, the feeling that fuels my most loving act, and the part of me that yearns for that feeling again and again. Whatever ceremony, ritual, meditation, song, thought, or action it takes to reconnect to that feeling is what I need to do today. Remember. Amen.
Many weeks ago, we began together. It seems like more weeks ago than it is. Sorry, I'm looking for the thing I'm going to read with you. We began together the journey that began on the 24th of April. And in that beginning, there was a reflection offered. I forget who read it during that service. By John O'Donohue. Give me a minute to locate it. Of course I put it here. So I'll do a little bit about what we're going to do while I find, here it is, while I find it. I'm going to offer you this prayer. We're going to read the small group practices. There'll be a brief time for Q&A, and then I've got some visuals to share with you that hopefully will walk you through the process that's been taking place, not only in many of the book groups, but also during our vision team meetings in terms of the deep thoughts that people have been thinking. And finally, just in the same way that you all did listening sessions, we had community listening sessions. And so the vision team wants to share with you what some of the community responses were to their questions. A reflection. and a blessing by John O'Donohue for a new beginning. In out-of-the-way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wander, this beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you were ready to emerge. For a long time, it has watched your desire, feeling the emptiness growing inside you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you had outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered. It heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondered, would you always live like this? Then the delight when your courage kindled and out you stepped onto new ground. Your eyes young again with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning that is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure, hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon, you will home in a new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits you.
In the book groups and each of these meetings, we've reminded ourselves of soulful small group practices for discussions such as this. These are adapted from Parker Palmer. Come to this work with 100% of yourself. This means 3 things: to attend as faithfully as possible, to be as present to this work as we can be, and to bring all of who we are here, our joys, our successes, as well as our fears and failings. Presume welcome and extend welcome. We all learn most effectively in spaces that welcome us. Know that you are welcome, that you belong, and extend this welcome to others. Speak for self. A helpful practice is to use I statements. Share the air. Pay attention to how much of the group time you take. Every voice is important, and no single voice ought to dominate. Listen to silence. Silence is a rare gift in our busy world. Allow silence to be another member of our group. If the going gets rough, turn to wonder. If you find yourself feeling uncomfortable with the perspectives shared by another, try not to allow judgment to set in. Instead, become intrigued, ask for more information, and be open to the experiences of others. Differences offer us an opportunity to learn from one another. Observe confidentiality. This is especially important in creating safety and building trust. No fixing. Offer advice or reflection when invited to do so, but otherwise avoid the temptation to fix, set straight, or counsel another group member. And finally, believe that it is possible to emerge from this work refreshed, surprised, and less burdened than when we came. Expect that our work together can provide for renewal, refreshment, and helpful perspectives for the work at hand.
When I used to lead worship 52 weeks out of 52 weeks is what it felt like. I never relaxed until I'd made my first mistake in the service. So I omitted one part of this for today. We're going to have a chance to walk through this. Welcome to you all. After the brief Q&A, we're going to have some book reflections from the group that read that, and then we'll go into the slides. But I'd like to start us with two aerial views of the city, one at a time. Max, can you put up the first one? So this is Burlington, and I'm hoping you can read some of the writing about where the various, no, not at all. Okay, basically what it's showing is when you look at an aerial view of this city, the proximity of places of worship to one another, social services to those places of worship, and an opportunity to reflect on the richness of what can be made available through what's in this city for any of these initiatives that you might propose. So we're asking you to think in terms of city partners or local partners. This is prompted by some work that's being done in Pittsfield, Mass., where an Episcopal priest whose name is Jennifer Gregg is building through her community called a Cathedral of the Beloved, something called a campus, that she has 7 churches in a 1-mile square circumference. And they're working with one another to build a campus to provide services. So in that nature, she came to speak with the vision team, and that kind of captured imaginations. Can you put up the next one, Max? There, it's a better view. It's a little bit closer. It may be easier to read the writing. Yeah, I'm seeing some heads nod. Just want to have you keep this in your minds and hearts as you think about what it means to be present with the kinds of blessings and abundance we have available in this time, in this place. In keeping with that, and this is a gift to the vision team, I'd like to offer you a reading from Oriah Mountain Dreamer. It's called The Invitation, and it goes like this. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals or have become shriveled and closed for fear of further pain. I want to know, can you sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it? I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with the wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes, without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it's not pretty every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you'll stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you've studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments.
I'm going to welcome you again on behalf of the Vision team. I'm Jennifer Jorgensen, and as we've done the last 2 Sundays, we are sharing, even though I'm at this mic, and facilitating conversation with you, not for you. Mandy Grace has a lovely microphone for those of you that are attending in person, and Dave Grace is monitoring questions coming in from those attending online. So we wanted to first open up, as Claire alluded to, with an opportunity for I have some burning questions that I need answered right now so that I could fully participate in the rest of our conversation today. So we're going to begin with a little bit of time for some of those questions. Then we're going to move into some time for the book group to be able to share reflections on what the book meant for you individually, for us as a church community, things that you're thinking about as a result of your reflection on participating in the book group. And then we will be closing today with revisiting any questions that folks have about the tools and the resources that we have here for you in person, online, and the proposal process. So that's, again, just a rundown of our time together today. But let's start with any burning questions that would be really helpful to have answered at this point, either in response to maybe watching or participating in the last 2 Sundays, or anything you've heard either in the service today or just now from Claire. You could go ahead and raise your hand and Mandy will come to you, or post and Dave will raise his hand. Great, Donna.
I think I read that if we're not able to be here on the day that you're voting on the proposals, that there's a way to vote for them online. How is that going to work?
I also want to be mindful that just because I'm in front of the mic, I don't want to answer all of your questions. We can all take turns with that. I'll grab this one. We'll talk a little bit more about that before we wrap up today, but there will be an opportunity to vote virtually, online, and we'll be sending some information between the 22nd and the 27th. And then there will be in person on the 29th. So there will be opportunity for folks in person or not to be able to participate in the voting. But vote, a one-time vote, not both.
But the online has to be before the 29th, right?
Yep. Yeah, by the 27th. So we'll remind you at the end, but I think it is in paperwork that was in the insert today, if I'm not mistaken, that Alyssa put together.
Yeah, Alyssa's letter.
Are you looking for one definite direction, or are you looking for a group of directions that will, is the winner going to take all, or are we going to do a variety of things?
Before Susan answers, we are all winners, so there's not going to be a winner. You're all winners in our books.
And we're looking for whatever is in your mind and heart on things that you would like to see happen from this church in the next few years. So, the sky's the limit on what you're thinking, and it doesn't necessarily come down to just one thing that we do. There could be several.
Bill Whitman. I don't know whether this is the correct time to ask this question, I spoke with Dr. Bamberg before this breakout session, and we had a brief conversation about a concern that I have. I have not read any of the books, like Al mentioned a couple of weeks ago. My wife and I have been away, and so I've not been here in person, but I have looked at the services as well as the 2 videos on the visioning. And last week, I watched with great interest, and I must say I was somewhat unnerved. As Tony and Carl and others of you who know me, I'm, from a financial standpoint, quite conservative. And so to hear that the proceeds of the sale of the parsonage would not be considered our money, or that the land on which the parsonage and the church are located is not our land, made me sit up and say, what the heck? And it seemed to trace back the logic flow to a number of areas: eugenics, land appropriation, abolition, et cetera, et cetera. So my question to Dr. Bamberg was, I've been a member for 15 years, thereabouts, and I don't know much about the eugenics subject matter. I know Vermont was maybe one of 30 states. But what's the connection? What is the moral failing of this church with regard to eugenics that it would cause one to question, for lack of a better phrase, the moral standing that this church has with regard to the other 2 topics of whether we own the land or whether we own the proceeds from the parsonage. So if somebody from the group could address that issue, and if now is not the right time, if you could double back when it is, that's my question.
I appreciate your question. I think Rob is going to answer that in the way that we can now, but I also imagine that some of those themes will come up as we discuss reflections from the book group as well.
Thanks. Just to be clear, what I'm saying right now, I'm speaking for myself, because it's not like we've had a congregational meeting or even a visioning team meeting to discuss these precise topics. But to me, looking at it's not our money, for instance, in a way, it should be a familiar idea to us in this congregation. We talk about this being our church, but we know it's not our church in the way that, like, I own my car, for instance, because for a number of reasons. First of all, it's Jesus' church. And secondly, we're just passing through. We're stewards of the church. This church has been here for literally over 200 years since before we came, and hopefully it will still be a vital of this part of this community 200 years after we're gone. To me, it's the same thing with the money. We're stewards of that money. We are the ones who are charged with the responsibility of seeing how that money is used in the service of the work of this congregation in the world. And so to me, that's what I mean by it's not our money. It's not our money in the sense that we spend it on ourselves. Maybe that's part of what we do with it, but we do that in the light of stewardship, if we're stewards of that money. In terms of the sins of the past, I don't feel any responsibility for them. I didn't do them. What I do feel responsibility for is understanding how I have benefited from those sins of the past, and then how does that tell me how I need to act going forward during the rest of my life? And we too often don't explore the hard parts of history. And one of the things we would like to do in this visioning committee is do that. And we have been doing some of that, exploring the hard parts of history. And I can give you kind of a example of how we don't study the hard parts of history. When I was a kid growing up in Lawrence, Kansas, we had a session on Kansas history, which I think it was in 3rd grade, it might have been 4th. And we were taught proudly that Kansas had the highest enlistment rate in the Union Army during the Civil War. Years later, I learned Kansas also had the highest desertion rate during the Civil War. And so we were taught the good, but we weren't taught the more difficult part. And dealing with the difficult, I believe, is part of our obligation as Christians.
I think for now, that's our answer, and we'll create some space for the group to talk more about the reflections on eugenics or Indigenous peoples in the land. It looked like, Mandy, did you have something to contribute, or do we have an additional question?
I just had promised.
Great. Great. So there's just a request to hold the mic closer, please, for individuals to hear the questions that are asked.
And I had promised Carl that he could.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, just to continue what Rob just said, we are indeed stewards of the money, and I think that's important. This is not a windfall that we're getting from the sale of the parsonage. This is an investment that was made by the congregation of this church many, many years ago, and we need to keep that in mind. But my question really is very prosaic. When do we make these proposals, and who do we send them to?
We will revisit that at the end of our time today. I know that I keep saying that, but there's a timeline. I'll say it now. We'll say it again. The proposals are due by the 22nd. We have a proposal template printed that was available when you came in and when you leave today. If you go to the website, there's a big blue box that says our visioning process. There's a huge page that has links to every one of these sessions, links to all of the documents, including soon the community conversations. So all of the notes from our meeting with over 200 folks, I think, guiding the vision process. The template will be there as well, and we'll be providing clear guidance on how to submit that. I think it's via email to the office, so we can go over those specifics with you. And then there will be a time that we attempt, to the best of our ability as a vision team, to pull together ideas that seem to be kind of in the same bucket or theme to prepare for our time together on the 29th in person. And so as much as I know we're talking dollars now, and that's really important, there will be a lot of conversations around that in the future. I think part of what we're really trying to do is to, and I'm looking to my team to correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but to really kind of get a little bit above that, a little bit of a balcony view, and really be taking a look at vision and coming together as a community and as a congregation around our collective vision of doing Christ's work, and what does that mean for us here and in this space. And then there will be significant strategy and steps and budgeting and planning that will happen as a result of that. That will be very mindful, just as all of our work has been in the past. But this is really the visioning time. And we're trying to not impact our ability to vision who we could be or how we can show up in our community by limiting that to kind of financial dollars at this point. Hopefully that makes sense. Additional burning questions you need answered now, knowing we're going to have some time for the book group to respond, and then we will spend the end of our meeting clarifying next steps in process. Anything online, Dave? Okay. I'm trying to model silence being an additional member. I see Andy's hand. Great.
Andy Barker. To what extent are we imagining that the visioning and the decisions around these proposals will connect into our existing process of decision-making in the church? Are we talking about decisions that will certainly, maybe, probably, or not necessarily go through warned meetings, congregational debate, discussion, and votes?
That is a great question. That's a lovely question, and I'm looking to my shared vision team. I see some pointing to Alyssa. She's putting her mic on now, so I think she'll be responding.
Claire, do you want to take that?
I can start it.
Okay.
So it's kind of, it's going to come in layers. So the 22nd, or 29th, excuse me, when people have a chance to gather, and the online voting will have already happened, right? But that will be kept aside, how that turned out in terms of the proposals. On the 29th, you get together as a congregation and literally vote with your bodies. The groups that are assembled in response to the proposals that advance, because you'll be voting with your bodies, there may be bodies that don't show up at some of the proposal tables. That will make its own indication. The groups that constellate around certain proposals will form a working group to develop over the summer a comprehensive proposal. To one of the questions, or to the point that Jennifer was making, that means you'll look into state grants that can match. You'll look into federal grants. You'll look into other partners as you begin to develop. So that's another reason for us to want you to really think out of the box. In the fall, there will be a second gathering to hear what's come out of the development of those proposals in detail. Staffing patterns, budgetary. We do not want that for the 22nd. I'll show you that proposal in a moment. But we will want it in the fall from the working groups that will have a chance to develop that. Again, on that warned day, invitational day in the fall, you'll be able to come, and there you will make some final selections. We're anticipating there's going to be more than one that will capture your hearts. At this point, as I look between the listening sessions and the community responses, which I'll show you in a moment, it's pretty amazing in terms of the wideness and the depth of people's thinking with their hearts. Then, Andy, I imagine it will move to a congregational meeting. Yes, okay, good. I'm looking at Alyssa, her head goes up and down. All right, then it'll move to a congregational meeting. I'll have to, right? So it's a hybrid kind of doing a new thing, a new way, and really using the original congregational approach to voting as a congregation and putting it then to what's come in later years in a congregational church, the warned meeting. Is that helpful? So lots and lots and lots of opportunity for input, even as we began the listening sessions with a wide open invitation to people.
So the only thing I would add to that is that all of this is technically within the church the church guidelines and bylaws as they currently stand as well. So we authorize the visioning team to do this work in consultation with the trustees. The trustees have been a part of it each step of the way, each new process. The trustees are updated, give the go-ahead. So including this work, this is part of how the new teams system really works, right? That we're authorizing these teams to do this work and to go out into the congregation and facilitate these things. So it is currently within the bylaw structure, and it will be voted upon in an official way what projects we take on in the future. In the past, in the future, time is fluid.
Hi, I'm Mike Nauer, and the way I hope this unfolds is we want to end up with vision. This is my model. Vision, strategies, and tactics. The tactics will be the things we actually do, the projects, the proposals. And it'll be a little bit messy, and the tactics reflect what we can't quite yet express about the vision. A lot of us have vision statements that we may not have translated for ourselves down into specific projects, and we'll go back and forth. But I hope at the end of the process we'll end up with both a common vision, which then develops into some good strategy statements that then translate into specific projects. And I'm going to do everything I can to participate and make sure we don't spend all of our time just at vision or all of our time just at tactics, but that there's a mix. One of my favorite quotes is, if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else.
Exactly.
So we've got to pay attention. So it'll be a messy, iterative process, but if we all have the patience and participate, I hope that's what we'll end up with, was a common vision that very logically then translates down into the set of projects that we expressed interest in and helped us develop the vision and so on.
Thanks, Mike. Looks like Dave has a question.
This is a question from online. It's from Diane G. And she says, do you need to be present on the 29th to be in a summer working group?
No. Great question. But no. What I love is how eager and excited everyone is to talk about the process. So I'm excited to loop back around to that at the end of our time today. That means that we're doing great stuff and folks are really, really interested in that. I also am kind of hearing from some folks behind me and looking at the time. I'd love, if it's okay, to shift into creating some space for the book group to share some of their reflections from the history of Indigenous peoples, co-facilitated by Mandy and Rob. So for those of you that are here or attending online here in person or attending online, would love to hear what this book meant for you. You know, what reactions or reflections do you have either on your own growth and learning or the connectedness to what that means for our church community here and the work that we do kind of envisioning moving forward.
Hi, I'm Cindy McGue, and I read Praying with Your Feet, and I was so empowered by this book. And so I was at the Flynn the other day, and as you walk into the Flynn, there was a voting, people from...
Sorry, Cynthia, if you can hold it up closer just so other people can hear you, great.
Trying to get... I'll just do this. Trying to get votes, people to vote, okay? There was a booth. And on the way out, he was still there, and I said, how many people did you get to register to vote? And he said 2. And I thought to myself, why are they doing it at the Flynn, where people can afford a lot of money to, and we should be doing it outside. And so I had that idea. And I have one more idea. Somebody I went to a meeting, and they were looking for interpreters to work in the federal court system who spoke other languages. Well, I happened to go to a music program, and somebody next to me was sitting there, and they were speaking Portuguese, and I knew it was Portuguese. So I sort of interrupted them, and I said, what language are you speaking? And they said Portuguese. And they were new residents to Wake Robin. And they said, we wish we could use our languages to help. And I immediately said, well, you can go and volunteer or get a job to interpret at the federal court. And they spoke fluent Spanish as well. So I was so excited. And so I have all these ideas, and I'm just so excited about it. So anyway.
Thank you so much for your ideas.
Dawn Plant here. My reaction to the Indigenous Peoples History book, I was shocked. I grew up in a very small town in Vermont. I was never taught the history or this version of our history. I went through many emotions reading the book and sitting through the book group. I didn't offer much, but I certainly listened a lot. And now we're at the point where, and then also it was interesting that at the same time that we were reading this book, obviously Putin was doing his, or is continuing to do his thing in Ukraine. And I kept seeing articles in the paper. There were at least 2 or 3 articles in the Free Press. And then I got in the mail just this past week a request for donation to the Native American Education Fund, looking for monies for educating Native Americans. It just seemed so intriguing to me that all these things were jumping up at me. And I was able to move a little bit from the shame of it all to, I worked through, we got to do something to rectify this, to the place that we as a church can perhaps do things to encourage acceptance of Native Americans and other groups that are not the white supremacy ones. Just my thoughts.
Thanks, Dawn. I did see Anne's hand up. Then it looks like Donna next. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm just going to stand up and turn around so I can see everybody. When I read this book, it was, as Dawn said, pretty shocking, or at least so amazing that I grew up in New England and didn't really know about history in this, as told in this way. But the one thing that I've taken with me, I'm not sure it was actually in the book or it was some of the materials that came through associated with the topic, but the idea of firsts and lasts. And this is related to the phenomenon of a culture being erased right before our eyes through history. We celebrate all sorts of firsts. First Congregational Church of Burlington, First Unitarian Society, first people off the Mayflower to step on the beach, first baby born in the New World, all these firsts. So I thought, well, that's, first things, right? At the same time, we don't acknowledge what was here before. And then this one resource was talking about the lasts. And especially the late 19th century, well, I guess starting with Andrew Jackson, right? But really coming to fruition, I think, the end of the century and into the 20th century, was the idea of the lasts. So in Massachusetts, it was the last native chief, or the last woman Indian living in a town, or the last, powwow, or whatever, right? They were all celebrating the last, and the last was a way to stamp out the culture, because then the dominant culture thinks, there are no more. So We don't have to worry about it. It's not an issue, whatever. And yet, part of that whole movement was also keeping the place names. So what is that about, right? Keep the place name, but you erase the culture that was here. It was a very eye-opening experience. So.
Thanks, Anne. Donna.
Hi, Donna Lee. I read the same book, and I found that I had to put it down from time to time because it made me so sick to my stomach. Acknowledging and dealing with what our forefathers and mothers had done to the Indigenous people. It was a very hard read. Anne summed up a lot of what I was thinking. I was shocked because I thought I was pretty well informed about Native American issues. I had done a lot of reading about it, before I went out west on a trip. I knew all about what Andrew Jackson had done, but I had no idea really how intentional our governments had been and our forefathers had been about wiping out Indian people and stealing the land, right from George Washington forward. I thought Andrew Jackson was an anomaly. And when I read this book, I truly was shocked at how intentional everything was right from the beginning. And it was dramatic for me. And then, right up into, more current, the eugenics movement in Vermont. And Bill was asking the question, what has that got to do with us? I don't know what our church members, how they were involved in all of that, but my guess is we didn't take a moral stand to stop it. And that might be what our place is in acknowledging that. Maybe we have to look back in our history to find out if we did take a moral stand or did we do anything to stop it, but my guess is that we didn't. So we have to look at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
I just want to touch on that really quickly before we go to Bob, obviously. Nutting's history of First Church covers this very briefly. There's not a lot of information on it, but the congregational ministers at the time when this was really being popularized attended many a conference on eugenics, and there was even voiced support from it. Now, I don't know how that parlayed into worship here, but the congregation was aware of it enough that it made it into our history books, right? It was a conversation that was had here that was pro-eugenics. So it's not an abstract concept. It's not that we didn't take a stance. It's that we entered into the conversation and not necessarily on the side you would hope, or hopefully on the side you would not hope for. There's not a lot of information other than that both congregational ministers were involved and attended conferences and brought information back and that kind of thing.
So we have a question up here, and then I know Dave has one as well in the back, Mandy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Bob. I'm relatively new to the congregation. And I thought, as many of us, first of all, let me thank Rob and Mandy for the enormous efforts they put into our group. I mean, their background work was awesome. I'm always amazed at where the Holy Spirit leads me to, and it led me to this group and this book. I thought that I knew something about American history. In the introduction to the book, the author equates settler colonization with genocide. And I'd only proceeded through the introduction, And I thought that was a bit of a stretch. When I finished the book, I thought, that is reality. Because when you think about the land here was settled. There was civilization here. These were not savages. They had a society, they had governance that worked. All of the land that was eventually settled by the colonists was previously settled. They lived here. They appreciated the land. They did not have the concept of land ownership. Land ownership came when the King of England granted land to certain of their supporters. The land was then monetized. So when you look back at the history of how wealth was created by taking the land and monetizing it. And that, in one sense, is the basis of capitalism that we have today, is that something was taken from somebody and certain people got extremely wealthy. And the wealthy people were essentially white males, because women and indigenous populations had no vote. There was no seat at the table. So my thinking as I finished this book was, this changed my thought process. And what we do about it is what we will decide we're going to do. I happen to teach at the university on sustainable innovation. And I know that the indigenous population that was here believed in sustainability. So I think there is some shared vision between our indigenous forefathers and what the young group I'm teaching today is, because they are passionate about preserving what we have here. So I am looking forward to the process, and I thank you all.
Thank you, Bob. So I just want to remind you, Mandy, that I think Dave had a question from an online attendee.
I actually have two comments. The first is from Paul Blumhart on Indigenous history. I was struck by how little I knew of Abenaki culture and history, actually all Indigenous history in the U.S. But more than this, I am increasingly aware of how little contact and knowledge of current Indigenous cultures we have, and how links and communication and community with Native peoples might be possible in a non-touristy way. The second comment is from Nancy on Donald's phone. Reading by the book was a humbling experience. Many times I found myself thinking, what am I or my government and institutions part of now that is similar?
Thank you for both of those. Any other reflections from the book members, the book group members on Indigenous peoples in connection to vision or our church, or how it moved or changed you?
I'll say something as a participant and mainly listener, because I took a lot of notes from the group, which was a really blessing, because afterwards I would read through it and have the opportunity to research things that I didn't understand to make sure that I captured it correctly. So there was a lot that I learned. I did very well in the advanced placement test from high school history, and it really, it turns out, helped me very little. One of the things that I wanted to share as a reflection was, as I researched many of the books or suggestions that came from our group, particularly early on, that reflected what our group members had already learned that they wanted to share with others. Most of these were books that were written by white men. Some of them, it turns out, were fictional accounts that were informed by historical understanding. And for me, that was a real challenge. It was like a disappointment and a walking into a wall at the same time. Because I realized that we don't have that many resources, largely because maybe we don't have exposure to them. And as a woman who has spent a lot of time and continues to spend a lot of time on what the access issues look like for us in technical fields, sometimes when we don't have capabilities because we don't have the access. And sometimes when we don't see books that are written by the population we're trying to learn about, it's our access. And so I would just float that idea as something that was rather shocking for me as a participant in the book group.
I just want to say one more piece, which is if you are interested in First Church's history around this, there are about 35 pages in Nutting's book from 1880 to 1945 that cover a lot of ground in relationship to the Indigenous people's history, in relationship to missionaries that we had to Native Americans out west during the Homesteading Act time, in relationship to the eugenics movement. That particular section is worth a read if you're curious.
And
there are copies in the library.
And you, with the other congregational ministers, have done some research on this that go, underneath that.
Yeah.
I'll just say that I think it was 3 synods ago where I was present when the first of the UCC churches returned to the Indigenous peoples land that was theirs, that is, the church had a deed, and actually gave it back during synod to representatives of that tribal nation, and how moving that was. And since then, that is not an uncommon occurrence, particularly Wyoming, Dakotas, where there's that amount of land to be able to give back. So when you begin to take a look at the listening sessions and some of your responses, some of it touches on this. So again, I'm going to remind you, as you begin to conceptualize the proposals, please go look at the answers you have all given to questions 3 and 4. We actually draw your attention to that on the proposal form, which I'm going to show in a minute. Oh yeah, and they're here. They're here. They're also in the visioning part on the website. Max, could you put up the next slide? So in addition to the listening sessions that we had with members of the congregation, there were listening sessions with community leaders in Burlington, people who'd been invited to take part in these listening sessions. I've listed the questions that they were asked, and I've listed the people who participated in them, with the exception of Reed Willis, also participated in them, and her name does not show up here. So I really want to ask you to take a moment, take a look at that. By the way, this will all be made available also online in the visioning box so y'all can see it. So let's look at some of their responses. Max, can you do the next slide? So here are some of the responses to the first question. Take a moment. These are the things that people think of right off the top of their heads when they think about First Church Burlington. Pretty complimentary, I have to say. So let me take you, again, this will be available online. I want to take you to the answers to the second question. This was, number one was the overwhelming response. And interesting ideas about how to manage this that will come in a moment when they begin to answer some of the same questions you answered. Number four, the same person said all three of those in a row, so it's not like three people said that. Pretty wonderful reflections at a high level. Again, you saw what some of the positions were of the people who participated in this. Okay, let's take a look at the third question. Oh my goodness. What would you like to be able to say about these concerns 3 years from now that you cannot say today? Yeah, would it be, okay, I was afraid of that. Number one, we have increased affordable housing at all levels. Number two, health care is now affordable for and available to all people. Number three, progress is made in leadership that is more equitable and representative of the population. Some of what you've already touched on. We need more alignment with what the city can meet. So resources have been scaled up to meet the needs made more obvious. This was a really good point, made more obvious by the pandemic. Number five, think more strategically about where we want to be. Number six, we will have made the achievements, so this is referring back to number four, that will then allow us to once again have aspirational goals because current needs are met more completely. So one person had a fantasy, this is number 7, of going to an event where the church is being celebrated for the cool thing that they've accomplished. So, and she kept saying, it's a cool, innovative solution. I don't know what it is, but you're going to come up with it. Number 8, sustainable change has been achieved. Money is too easily spent and needs to be invested in the community. So again, back to some of the comments you made earlier, sustainable. There has been healing and some restorations and reparations. One person suggested a skyscraper behind the church. I'm sorry, I obviously was tired. This took me late last night. There's a skyscraper behind the church to be given back to affordable housing in recognition that this was once other land. Number 11, expand the expression and training. There was one person there who really touched my heart, who spoke repeatedly about the gift First Church gives in facilitating community conversation. And he really saw that the expertise that you have, that the community depends on and invited you to build on, is being community. And number 12, the former position that was held by the Howard Center would be refunded. It is defunded right now. And that position was a community outreach position where there was a liaison that would go out into the community, meet people where they are, hear what they needed, and really do some community outreach with that. So there's that. Okay, number 4 is going to need to be read too. It's really small. It's because of all the rich answers, right? This got really exciting as you began to meet with people. What do you believe we, First Church Burlington, might be able to help you do to achieve that vision? Develop a voice and VIA. Vermont Interfaith. Thank you. Number 2, empower individuals. We need to fix ourselves in order to fix the world. So individuals and address systems. So that's what empower at both levels. Investing in the community versus spending in the moment. Number 4, leverage funds, partner with projects now in effect. So this came out of the listening sessions. You do not want to reinvent the wheel. So coming alongside what exists, and in the case of the Howard Center, has been defunded. Comprehensive street outreach ministry, number 5 is, and that's addressing mental health, housing resources, and medical services. Number 6, Howard Center outreach, worker position funded again. There seems to be a theme here. And identified as this staff position is being provided by First Church Burlington, which brings some ties back. Number 7, COTS subsidies. Number 8, daycare providing supportive educational programs. Number 9, spearhead social justice and accessibility issues. Number 10, bathrooms at the church for public use. Porta potties, public bathrooms at the shelter pods. This was addressed later in the conversation. Mental health and substance abuse services. ARPA funds are going to housing. So the ARPA federal government funds are going to housing, and they're working with CHP. Number 12, take a leadership role in helping to heal the brokenness in our community. Number 13, provide community resources to fight misinformation. Fund an independent reporter position through the Free Press to keep people informed. 14, continue advocacy work. JUMP, Interfaith Action Committee. Number 15, evaluate current programming for impact and empowerment. This person happened to question the effectiveness of small potatoes in terms of what else might be needed in the community. And number 16, the church can take a moral stand on issues others cannot. And the next question, what have we not asked that you might have hoped we would? Nothing. So grateful for the questions and the opportunity to answer them. And I feel reassured that these questions are being asked and that there are people who are doing this work out there, people with whom to partner. Universally, in the community meetings, people were grateful for the opportunity to do this. And then I did a quote last week in the second hour program I wanted to share with you in writing. This is by Scott Sonnenschein, teaches at Rice University, business psychology. And this is some of his reflection on our current educational system and that it needs to be addressed from both the positions, daycare and back to one of the earliest answers, equitable representation of the population in leadership, that everyone is represented at the table. Okay, the next slide. These are the 4 questions you all answered. Again, I've highlighted numbers 3 and 4. I want to remind you that the answers there were rich, and you have them available here. And finally, the proposal. So let me talk about this. This is a high-level, not detailed opportunity to express a vision, right? What we have asked for is, what would success look like? Right? So what does success look like at a high level? There's the proposal will be at the link. And it's going through its 3rd iteration, so wait till Tuesday. Oh, it is there, okay. And then with whom would you partner? Again, high level. So what I talk to churches about when they're in a historic building is to look at partners with sacred spaces whenever they're going to do bricks and mortar. It's a federal opportunity. It's an incredible program. So that kind of thing. Do some research. And then just so we know, did you attend any of the worship services or any of the second hour programs, and just check those off? And if you were in a book group, which one? And then finally, the vision team would really like to invite you to think about working in groups. The cross-fertilization of ideas. Also, some people have noticed that you've begun to do that anyway towards common visions of what doing life differently would look like after reading these, having opportunity to be in these book groups. So here's your timeline. And Alyssa's going to check me out because we've had so many. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to jump in. There's one extra meeting. This looks great. This looks awesome.
The 15th.
The 15th,
yeah,
right.
I missed that.
Speaking about working in small groups, we recognize that because of the hybrid nature of worship and the lack of coffee hour up until Easter, right, there's not been that same opportunity for spark, right? To have those conversations on your way to the bathroom. They're like, oh yeah, I'm interested in that too, or that, or that. So after worship next week, we will be hosting online only to try and get the cross-fertilization between in-person and online folks, a conversation about what the answers were to questions 3 and 4 and what you're excited about. So like if you've got an idea, I'm thinking about Cindy, you're really excited about that, jump on that call and check it out with other folks, right? That's the place to figure out if there are other people for you to work with around that. So, I want to recognize time. The one thing left is for us to close in observing the sacredness of this time. B, I want to allow for, has there been anything that we've covered in the presentation today that has left you with a burning question? Or even a non-burning question? Again, this will all be available online. The form for proposals is online already. Go to the homepage. There's the 4 colored blocks right on the front homepage. The blue one is the vision one. Click on it. The proposal form, all of the background, all the sessions, it all should be up there. There's even a fillable Google form for proposals.
Okay, so again, high-level proposals due by the 22nd. There are a couple ways of doing that. If you're going to bring it to the church office, do not wait until the last minute. Get it in. The online voting will close on the 27th, and the instructions for how to do that will be made available just in general to all of you. You either vote online or you vote in person. If you're going to vote in person, please come on the 29th. It will be a wonderful opportunity to gather together. It will be a longer than usual second hour program because there are a couple of steps, and it will be exciting. And to Alyssa's point, it'll be an exciting opportunity to trade ideas. Somebody asked online if they'll have a chance to participate in the groups. Yes. Because they will have voted online, we'll have their names what are interested in those proposals. So they'll go along with the other people who are voting in person on the 29th. Does that make sense? Oh, sorry.
How are we going to reach the people, probably older members, who are not comfortable with technology? So maybe they are housebound, or they're not able to, or do not want to come to worship and the church in person. because of the pandemic or anything else. So they're not here in person, they're not online.
And yet they
Is
would want to
there a-
be part of developing a proposal?
Right, is there a way that we can team up and with?
I'm sure there is. We need to, that is not one of the aspects that we've considered yet. So I think we need to put our heads together and figure that out. Thank you so much for raising that.
We have asked all members of the deacons and trustees to reach out to folks that you haven't
go.
seen in a while. Those would be ideal folks to reach out to. And, you know, you can walk them through the process too. Particularly probably online. If they're not coming to worship, it's probably for COVID.
Yeah.
Would a letter and information go to people?
Well, we mail, all of this stuff has been mailed out through our e-news gets regularly sent out, so they should be getting it.
Just an idea, what about if we organized a group of people to go out and ring their doorbell and give them the form? I don't know.
I think the deacons and the trustees and the vision team members are making individual phone calls, which is the, you know, honestly the safer way to do that, right, for everyone's sake. So I think that's the solution that has been conceived. So in closing, sorry, I'm getting coached from the sidelines here. In closing, we wanted to ask if you would join in a common experience, and Amy graciously agreed to stay so she can play for us one of the hymns that we sang this morning. This is my song. So if we could do that together, that would be great.
We're going to go down so we can see the
Okay,
words.
all right. We're going to position ourselves so we can see words. Okay.